When I see clients that come to me and they have their local business attorney that has no exposure to the MSP world, or when they cobble them together because they found them on the internet or something like that, I am almost never seeing it being touched in the MSA. I think it's really important that you find somebody that is so familiar with the sector so that they can go through the nuances associated with it. Most clients will believe that the MSP is providing them with absolute protection against cybersecurity failures.
Whether or not you provide cyber services to your client, you are still exposed to cyber liability. And I am delighted to welcome again to my show one of the most prominent lawyers in the country, specializing in MSP legal practices, Thomas Fafinski. Thomas is joining us today to talk about a topic that is front and center in the MSP space: cybersecurity, and what are some of the best practices that MSPs should be following when protecting themselves against cyber liability. If you were at university majoring in MSP, this would be a required course, people, not an optional one. Listen in. But first, let's get some housekeeping out of the way. My name is Madhur Dugar. I am a senior M&A advisor at Excendio Advisors, focused around MSPs and IT services. And this is my podcast series, M&A Insights. If you are interested in finding out more about how we are helping MSPs exit or grow inorganically, write to me at madhur@excendio.com, connect with me over LinkedIn, or visit our website, www.excendio.com. Let's get started. What is the state of play around cyber insurance? What are the requirements from a regulatory perspective for MSPs and their clients?
Yeah, so there are requirements about how you treat data, like how you get, like in a healthcare setting, you got to comply with HIPAA, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
But there isn't any sort of law that I'm aware of in any jurisdiction that says that somebody has to have cyber insurance coverage,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the MSP or the MSP's ultimate customer. I'm not aware of any jurisdiction that requires you to secure cyber security insurance.
Okay, interesting. So
But
there
each of
are,
those, like the healthcare industry has
yeah,
some pieces. The payment card industry has pieces.
right.
If you're a government contractor, you have to comply with certain uh, protection of data. And financial services is another one where you have to comply with the protection of data. But nothing requires you to have
Insurance,
insurance.
right. So how often are you seeing MSAs, where there is no language,
Yeah.
to protect the MSP from situations that are happening at their client?
When I see clients that come to me and they have their local business attorney that has no exposure to the MSP world, when I see them come with their contracts or when they cobble them together because they found them on the internet or something like that, I am almost never seeing it being touched in the MSA. I think it's really important that you find somebody that is so familiar with the sector so that they can go through the nuances associated with it. So, for instance, most clients will believe that the MSP is providing them with absolute protection against cybersecurity failures,
Interesting.
that
Yeah.
they will not experience a breach unless the MSP has done something wrong. And the interesting part about that matter is that there is, broadly speaking, there are three types of failures. There's an administrative failure, a technical failure, and a physical facility-based failure. Like,
Okay.
somebody has access to the facility, or a former employee, which is kind of a combination of facility and administrative, still has access to a system. The MSP provides coverage on just one of those three items, and that is the technical components associated with it. And by far and away, the claims that I've seen have all been kind of generating from administrative failures, a little bit on physical, but administrative failures primarily. So like a physical failure would be you've got somebody working remote and they don't have the right security system set up there, or they're working in a coffee shop and somebody can see over and access their computer when they go get a refill or whatever it is like that. But almost always it's an administrative failure, the failure to remove a former employee or giving access to somebody, to a contractor that shouldn't have access.
Hmm.
And so and like when I say, by and large, the majority, I'm like 75% of
Wow.
the failures that I've seen are related to that, just roughly speaking.
Yeah.
And so, the first call they make is to their MSP and say, we've got a breach. What did you do? And it's like, well, we didn't do anything. So, like, one of the things I like to see in the contract is that the client will notify the MSP when there's an employee termination, so that we can go in and make sure that that person is locked up. That is super common for employees to be terminated and still accidentally have access to the system.
Interesting. There are, I think, like three buckets. One is the MSP getting insurance for itself because itself could be subject to a breach. Then there
Yes,
is language in the MSA for the MSP to have as a way to limit its scope of responsibility and make that clear in the MSA. And
yeah,
then there is cyber insurance that the client should be having to protect itself. Those are three. Is that fair to think about a framework as those three buckets?
it is. And so I have a few really smart clients, really smart, that say we're going to require that our clients have cybersecurity coverage. And that's one of the contractual requirements, and so that discussion is out there. It's all out on the table. A lot of it has to do with communication. So
Yeah.
the communication is happening at the time of the signing of the contract.
Yeah.
Um, but that's a brave position because a lot of clients are not looking to increase their
Yes.
overhead and expenses.
Yes.
So at the least, I think you should have language that says that the client should secure cyber insurance coverage,
Hmm.
because we are not the guarantor of a cyber security uh, breach-free environment.
Right.
Um, I do occasionally come along clients that say, I don't have cybersecurity coverage and I don't want to bring that topic up. So I would like to just be silent on that issue. I don't
Hmm.
recommend that,
Hmm.
but everything I build is custom. I don't like sell something off the shelf and say you got to do it this way. I build it custom to the client's need. The limitation of liability that you brought up
Hmm.
is a great way of saying, in the event that there is a failure, what kind of damages can you collect from us and how much? And so you can also exclude the criminal acts of third parties. Like, we are not going to be liable for the criminal acts of third parties,
Hmm.
which most people at the beginning of the relationship when they're signing that MSA, most clients will say, yeah, of course, sure, why not? Why would I make you responsible for the criminal acts of third parties? And every cybersecurity breach is a criminal act.
Hmm.
So we can kind of back channel.
Cyber insurance is also super interesting because you could get a claim today because something wrong happened 6 months ago, right? When the policy was not even at play,
Right.
right? Can you tell us a little bit about what that is, and what is it called, and how does it work?
Yeah. So they're one of the ways that cyber insurance dealers, brokers, uh, how they get business is they come in and compete on price because nobody wants to pay more, right? So they come in and they say, okay, let's say January 1st of 2026, we're gonna put this new policy in place, and you're going to experience a 50% savings. It's a claims made policy, which means that the insurer is only covering incidents that were reported while the policy is active. So
Hmm.
if January 2nd a claim is reported, then they'll say, okay, we'll take a look at that incident. But if they if the actual claim is derives from a breach that occurred months before, the insurance company has the ability to say, that was actually in a prior policy period. And because past incidents are not covered, we're only covering incidents that occurred
I
from
see.
January 1st to 2026 going
Yeah.
forward, then, we don't have to provide coverage.
Hmm.
So that is something you want to work through. The more
Hmm.
expensive policies will say, no, we're going to pick up your history too. And if a claim gets made during your policy period, even though it stems from a prior period,
Yeah.
we're going to cover that.
Yeah.
But the danger for the MSP is it is so attractive to have
Right.
that savings and premium, and the insurance broker is not your fiduciary. They're not
I
there
see.
to watch out for you.
Your
They're
best
just
interest,
there to
right?
sell a policy, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they may not adequately cover that so that you understand.
So basically, as an MSP, you need to watch out for exactly what they're covering in terms of like what period it occurred in and what period it didn't occur in.
Exactly. And be careful about switching policies because of the nature of that claims made policy. They're not covering anything that occurred before January 1st of 2026. It's less expensive than to stay with your existing um, provider who, let's say you had a claims made policy that started in 2020,
Hmm.
and they are saying we gotta insure against that history,
Hmm.
and so the policy is more expensive, but they are insuring a bigger period of time, so you may want to take that piece into
Into
account.
account. Yeah.
I
From a best practices perspective, um, should MSPs be speaking with their clients and educating them about this and telling them that they need to be getting their own cyber insurance?
I think at the very least,
Right.
it there should be language in the MSA that says you should client should secure a cyber insurance policy um, with appropriate terms, that type
Yeah.
of thing. If you're a customer of that MSP and you're in front of a judge
Yeah.
and you say to the judge, I thought this MSP was providing all of the coverages. I thought every cybersecurity event would be taken care of by my outsourced tech staff. The the MSP can say, how could the client have that position
Right.
if in the contract it says, first of all, we're not liable for the criminal acts of third parties,
Yeah.
that we are recommending that they secure cyber insurance coverage, and we will never pay ransom on a ransom claim.
Right.
You could put in other language like, hey, we're going to be monitoring your system. And when we monitor your system, we're using third party software to access the system. It's not anything we've created,
Hmm.
and you wouldn't want anything that we've created. You'd want something that's a commercially viable software solution. And so, as long as we're using a commercially viable software provider to access your system, you're not going to hold us responsible for any failures that result from a failure of that
Right.
access software.
Hmm. The reputational damage that can occur to an MSP, even though they were not ultimately at fault for what happened with that client, can be tremendous. It can be a business breaking event. What can an MSP do to control that
Yeah.
risk? Yeah.
So the reputational damage is just incredible. So you can have a provision that says that you're not going to talk bad about us in there. That's a harder one to enforce because of
Hmm.
the free speech component.
Hmm.
The better thing that I like is to actually have everything set out in the contract that talks about the terms and conditions that we're going to supply, so that if something is mentioned that is bad, you can go to the customer and say, hey, you're saying these bad things, Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, and you made a contract that said that we weren't providing coverage for this. So we're going to start telling the truth about you now too,
Right.
if you continue with this.
Okay.
But that
Yeah.
reputational damage is really just terrible. It's
Yep.
it's really hard.
What responsibilities do MSPs and their clients have in communicating breaches, right, to clients and regulators? and other stakeholders? Are there rules which say you must communicate and must do so within a certain period of time?
So that's a really interesting phenomenon because there's nothing in the rules that apply to MSPs only that provide MSPs with an obligation to
Okay.
notify.
Okay.
If you're serving a company that has obligations to notify, like if you're serving a healthcare clinic,
Yeah.
HIPAA makes a requirement that
Yeah.
disclosure be made. So if you are acting as an agent or an arm of that healthcare clinic and there's a failure,
Yeah.
you do have an obligation to notify anybody that's doing work for that healthcare clinic that comes into knowledge of that has an obligation to notify affected individuals, notify the regulators. Uh, most of the time you have a certain period of time, like in HIPAA, you have 60 days to provide that notification, and if you
Yeah.
don't, then there's penalties and fines and damages that they can pursue. So yeah, it's by virtue of your relationship with that financial services agency that now you've got to comply with all the requirements associated, with the financial sector. Um,
Have you seen cyber insurance products that cover the cost of regulatory fines and penalties? Like, is that an area of coverage that people get?
Great question, Matter. It is. It's inconsistent though. So
Mm-hmm.
some policies will provide for that type of coverage,
Mm-hmm.
and some policies won't.
Okay.
So just like some policies are claims made and some are occurrence based.
Yeah.
Uh, so some actually have PR and crisis management protection too. So
Okay.
so if actually a lot of them have the public relations component.
Mhm.
If you're an MSP and you are faced with this scenario, uh, the very first thing you should do is call your lawyer. You
Okay.
know, if you don't have a lawyer, find somebody you trust and talk to them. And then the very second thing you should do, and the lawyer will probably tell you to do this, is contact your insurance provider. The insurance provider, most of our exposure in this scenario is a gap. And the gap is from the time that we learn about the claim until the time that the insurance company takes over. The insurance company is never going to hire us to do the defense on that work for a client of ours. They just won't. There, there are too many reasons for them to be concerned about it. Like, how do we know that Fafinski is really doing just this cyber incident and not doing like a buy
Other
sell
work.
agreement too
Yeah.
or other work? Yeah,
Yeah.
and burying it there. So they want to have control over it, but there's that gap, and that gap is, 7 days to 10 days in most
Mm-hmm.
in most situations. Um, it's important to work with a reputable insurance company because that gap can be extended
I see.
if the insurance provider says we don't think there's coverage and we say yes there is. They can start something called a declaratory judgment action,
Okay.
and in that deck action, short as deck action, they're fighting about whether or not they have to provide coverage. Meanwhile, your client has this event, your client is suing you for it or making a claim against you for it, and damages are increasing. And so, there's that time is really important.
Oh my
I
God.
have I have seen insurance companies take over in two to 3 days though. So it
Okay.
can be very, very fast. So having a reputable one is important. Having an insurance provider with experience in having claims made and evaluating those. I would rather work with an insurance provider who discloses some situations that they've been involved in
Mm-hmm.
rather than somebody who says, "Oh no, we normally don't have these issues because our clients are so great."
Right. So that actually brings me to the next question around, remediating a situation that has occurred and the support that you need for actually detecting what has occurred and then remediating it, and the support that you need, that the first party and third party support that you need for situations like this. Who There might be independent companies that do this, but typically, if a client is in trouble and this is not their day job, like where would they go to get this help?
Yeah. So, the big exposures that an MSP is going to have is the legal defense.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's going to be regulatory investigation and the costs associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the incident response,
Mm-hmm.
like for you and for your client.
Mm-hmm.
That will entail a forensic investigation because they want to know who actually is it the MSP's fault or is it somebody else's fault. If it's not the MSP's fault, then we get a get out of jail free card. It's
Right.
let's say it's an administrative failure and it was a former employee that did it. You know, we're good, right?
Yeah.
The forensic investigator comes in and makes that conclusion, and then there's the PR and all that crisis management, not the expenses associated with the actual failure,
Mm-hmm.
but the expenses associated with dealing with the failure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the cost associated with your coming in and making sure that the breach is sealed
I see.
and not extending. So those are the real buckets of fees and expenses that you can incur. So because your insurer is involved so quickly,
Yeah.
uh, you would turn to your insurer,
Okay.
and your insurer would find those folks that they've worked with in the past
Okay.
and dealt with in the past.
I
But
see.
to your point on reputation management,
Yeah.
I think it's really important to make sure that you have PR and crisis management expenses covered in your policy.
That's a really good point. Do you not worry in that situation that the insurance guy, the person who they're going to recommend, might in turn have some conflict of interest because they're being recommended by an insurance carrier?
Yeah, so the insurance carrier is in alignment with you when it
Okay.
comes to causation of the breach.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, the insurance company is not necessarily in alignment with you when it comes to the PR. For PR and crisis management expenses, I would turn to your lawyer to be working with the insurance provided resources.
What are two or three things you want MSPs to really take away and say, I got to do this?
Well, first the language of the MSA.
Yeah.
You really have to address those. You really have to address that, communicate it in a way that is not going to kill your deal, because
Yep.
you don't want to kill your deal,
Yep.
but you do want to communicate it so that they understand. That's number one. Number two,
Mhm.
um, I want you to go get a good cyber insurance coverage policy, make it an occurrence made, or whatever. Work with your professional, your lawyer and your broker to decide which is best for you
Mhm.
um, in to provide your coverage. And number three, I don't think we should let the client feel like we're taking care of all of the cyber
Right.
issues. And that is a tendency from a marketing standpoint that we that
Right.
we say, oh no, we got you all
We
taken care
got
of.
everything. Yeah.
And I think communicating that we've got the technical piece down. And if you want to hire us to be your, virtual CTO,
Yeah.
we'll do the
Do that.
administrative
But
piece too.
sure.
But we're not doing it unless you're paying us for it.
That's a separate piece of work. Yeah.
It is a separate, and the physical site security, I don't know, most MSPs are really not qualified
Hmm.
to verify that the physical site is secure.
Hmm.
And so even if we're doing the virtual CTO thing,
Hmm.
part of their responsibilities or duties in that addendum that you supply to them should be something like we're recommending security measures um, from a consultant, from a consultant that does the physical plant security
Hmm.
piece.
Thomas, thank you so much for sharing
Oh,
your thoughts on this podcast on this really important topic. Really appreciate your insights, and as always, look forward to staying in touch and doing more of these in the future. Really appreciate it.
well, thank you for having me, Matter. I appreciate it.
Thank you.